Welcome, everybody. My name is Sydney Nelson, and I'm a communications officer at Right Livelihood. This is a press conference with 2024 Laureate, Joan Carling. We're so honored that you're here, Joan. Thank you. And I wanted to remind everybody that this is a press conference that will be held in English. There's B-roll, video interviews, and photos available on our website and via EBU. And this press conference will only last 30 minutes. And unfortunately, we have to be pretty strict with that because we have all of our press conferences with the laureates this year back to back. So without waiting any further, I'll start with opening some questions to Joan, and then we can open the floor to all of you. And you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And of course, everything said here is on the record. Okay, so let's begin. Joan, what work are you currently doing to strengthen Indigenous people's rights?
Yes, there are at least 4 areas where we are working with my organization, the Indigenous People's Rights International, in strengthening the recognition of Indigenous people's rights. First is that we are providing direct support for communities in the front lines, especially those that are defending their rights to their lands, territories, and resources. And unfortunately, this is increasing. So the need to amplify their voices and at the same time giving them the legal and other technical, logistics, and political support is very, very much needed. The second is building and strengthening networks among Indigenous peoples' organizations and allies, because we need to be together in this big struggle. Defending Indigenous people's rights is not an easy job, because we're up against the most powerful, and so we need to build the broadest solidarity and cooperation amongst ourselves as Indigenous, but also with others who are with us in this struggle to recognize and defend Indigenous people's rights. The third is amplifying the voices of the communities through engagement with UN human rights mechanisms, because they are still, it's the organization of states that has the obligation to respect and protect rights, including Indigenous people's rights. So it's an arena where we can submit complaints and reports and demand justice and accountability, and hopefully to end impunity to the violations that are taking place. And fourth is of course the need to strengthen our Indigenous organizations. So we're also providing support for capacity building that is also requested by Indigenous organizations, like, for example, the conduct of their assemblies or meetings, or even capacity building to document and report human rights violations, because what we hear now is just a tip of the iceberg in terms of the extent of human rights violations happening in different areas in the world.
Thank you. And what would you say are some specific cases of the criminalization and marginalization of Indigenous peoples that are particularly urgent right now today?
Yeah, the urgent ones are related more to also the global crisis that we're facing, which is the climate change. We are further marginalized by the impacts of climate change, and even more with the absence of the support we need. As Indigenous communities are in the front line, right? We are in the most volatile, fragile areas, remote areas, and affected by flooding and all this, and yet we don't get the support. So that's another form of the discrimination, just because of the remoteness. The other one is the solutions to climate change is again violating our rights. We talk about the energy transition, where it's again imposed to us without even consultation, sharing of information, and getting our consent. And that is and that also includes the mining of transition minerals, which is needed for the green transition. And this is really going to be a very huge problem for indigenous peoples, because more than 50% of the transition minerals needed are found in indigenous territories or nearby. And conflicts are already happening in many parts because indigenous peoples are again ignored and criminalized when we act to defend and protect our lands. So that's another form. And the third is the conservation, that while we of course support conservation and are actually doing conservation, the approach, the fortress conservation approach that says that people will have to be evicted in biodiversity areas for protection is again leading to further displacements of indigenous peoples and denial of our livelihood. So what we see is, on the one hand, we are being evicted from transitional minerals and energy projects, and on the one hand, we're also again evicted because of conservation. So where are we going to now? Our lands and resources are used in the name of climate change, yet we are actually the ones protecting and conserving nature. So this is really a big environmental injustice committed against indigenous peoples that we need to address.
Thank you. And now I'll have my last question, and then we'll open up the floor. I see we already have one question waiting for us in the Q&A. So my final question is, what do you think people misunderstand the most about Indigenous peoples and their situation?
Yeah, what we're clearly misunderstood is that there's the ones that are very much interested in taking over our lands and resources are calling us anti-development. And they're projecting us as we're the ones preventing national development, and we're preventing economic growth for the rest of the society, which is not true. The fact is that we're the ones conserving biodiversity and resources that we all depend on. And now that we are facing the global crisis, the more that we need to protect this. And when people talk about development, it's a development that is driven by monopoly that is only enriching a few and causing the inequality of the majority. So that is not the development that we want. And the development that we want is the one that respects our harmonious relationship with nature, with each other, and values care and cooperation rather than competition, and that there is generosity and sharing of resources instead of greed. That is what we want. That should be the base of development, that we all benefit from the nature, and that we should manage it sustainably. So that is the kind of development that we are promoting, and the few that are with vested interest are pretending as anti-development. And now that we are in this crisis, or the global crisis that we are facing, it's time for people to rethink what kind of development are we actually pursuing.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll start with our first question. We have one from Sarah Emler. She's from ORF, the Austrian public broadcaster. And her question is, will this award have an effect on your work? Also in concern of funding, but also safety, as there is more international awareness now.
Yes, it's definitely it's in several levels, aside from, of course, the financial that will support our work, particularly in relation to supporting frontline defenders. It also gives us a very important platform to amplify the voices of indigenous peoples, to generate international attention, to highlight that indigenous peoples' rights is the responsibility of all, because what we're doing is protecting the resources and the environment for all. And we cannot be able to tackle climate change if our rights are continuously being violated, because then it will not enable us to protect the resources that we need to survive. and deal with the climate crisis. So that's the big contribution of this award, because it also put a spotlight now to Indigenous people's rights, and the need for us to really look into why Indigenous peoples are on the front line. Why are we sacrificing our lives to defend the environment? And we hope that this award also vindicates those that are being accused and being criminalized or accused with false accusations, simply because we are standing up. We are again standing up against the powers that are destroying our environment, that are violating our rights. So I know it has implications to my security, but on the other hand, I also believe that this will also put a spotlight to the need that people like me are not contributing to society, and that is also recognized globally.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the question. If you want, you can write a question in the actual chat, or you can also raise your hand and I'll unmute you so that you can ask your question that way. We have another question from Joshua Castellino, and he says, Joan, you have been an inspiration to all in the Indigenous movement and also so much wider. Your voice on how Indigenous peoples are once again paying the price for environmental damages they warned against is compelling. What message would you have for the extractive industries that continue to operate now in the name of transition minerals?
Yeah, it's important for the extractive industry to transform their behavior. It is important for them to finally come to terms that Indigenous peoples have rights, and that we have our dignity and we need to be respected. Because the way they are proceeding with the extraction of minerals is that we are completely ignored. We are not even consulted. Information are not even shared, and we're completely sidelined, and that needs to stop. That needs to stop. Because if we don't transform the mining industry to become responsible and accountable, this is not just an environmental injustice or a social injustice, but it will also make it will not also be sustainable, and it will really cause more global crisis with the unsustainable extraction of resources that only benefits the few.
Thank you. We have another question now from Celia Morton, and she's with the Indigenous Sami Radio. And she has two questions, so I'll start with the first one. And that is, do you see any similarities between the mineral mining and exploitation of Indigenous lands across the world?
Yes, this is the scenario that we're looking at, is that there's no difference between our situation in the developing countries and also in the developed countries. Indigenous peoples in the Arctic are also threatened with mining activities without their consent, even if their governments are saying that they are actually respecting Indigenous people's rights. But when it comes to resource extraction, it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge on how governments are actually respecting Indigenous people's rights and engaging with us in good faith. Because that's the important step, is for this to engage with us in good faith and in understanding also our perspectives, our values and aspirations, because our concern is not just about ourselves, but protecting the environment for all of us. So the situation is unfortunately the same, and that's also why we want to strengthen collaboration and solidarity amongst all Indigenous peoples and all parts of the world. This is our common struggle, so we need to be working together in facing this major challenge.
Thank you. And her next question is, do you remember a specific moment in your youth which made it clear that this was the work you wanted to do?
Yes, I started actually when I was 18 years old, to be to be specific. And this was when I've spent several months living with the tribal peoples outside my own community, where they were affected by the mining, by the dams, large dams. And it was so humbling for me to see how determined they are to defend their life, to defend the rivers, to defend the mountains, to defend the trees, to defend their farms, as a matter of dignity. And it was successful. It was success, and these are ordinary people, right, in the rural areas, but at the same time they're heavily discriminated, completely discriminated. So for me, I mean, how can you do this to people that are simply wanting to live differently with our cultures? And so that for me, it was the moment when I said I really need to work on Indigenous people's rights in the context of the overall human rights, because Indigenous peoples deserve respect. Indigenous peoples deserve dignity. Indigenous peoples are equal to others, and they should not be treated with discrimination.
Thank you. Those are the questions that we have in the chat, and I don't see any raised hands. We have about, oh, perfect timing. Okay, I will unmute.
Can I talk?
Yes.
This is Ildiko van Lübke from Bavarian Broadcasting. Indigenous communities are very often isolated in different parts of the world. How can you see that there is a kind of common resistance possible, which strengthens the many indigenous organizations all over the world, which are too weak in their single action, but how to make them more powerful as a voice for the future, which is really heard then?
Yeah, you're right about that. Indigenous peoples are often, we live often in remote areas. So that's the reality that we face. At the same time, now with the digital world, we find ourselves, we can now connect digitally in many ways. And there are also avenues, global avenues, where we come together. And these are, for example, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous People. So while a few can come, when they get back to their countries, they can reach out to the others in remote areas. So that's how the way we link through participation, but also using the information technology mobilized in different ways. I can give you an example where, for example, the indigenous peoples in Africa, the Maasai indigenous peoples, when they are being evicted in the name of conservation, we circulated a sign-on letter, a petition, where a lot of organizations signed. So that is already a demonstration of the kind of solidarity that we can build. We also organized webinars with the leaders of the Maasai people, explaining their situation. And there's a lot of solidarity expressed from different parts of the world, and that they communicate to the other communities using their own channels at the local and national levels. So that's the way we try to come together and form our network. And you're right, and express their problem with us, and we express our solidarity through statements, through petitions and all. They finally say, they are encouraged and give the sense that they are not alone. And so they're more encouraged to act even in isolation, because they know that indigenous peoples in other parts of the world, and even our allies, are there, ready to also support. So that's the way we try to connect and give solidarity to each other. Of course, we also use the support of other allies. Many are from civil society organizations who are there providing also the needed support and assistance to many of remote communities. I hope I answered your question.
I think so. If you can raise your hand again if you have a follow-up question. But for now, we have another question from Joseph Itongwa from ANA-PAC DRC from the Democratic Republic of Congo, an IPRI national partner. He says, I much appreciate the intervention of Joan. All she explains is true and is the reality we are facing in our country. And Indigenous Peoples' Rights International has helped us to promote our rights. The Forest Conservation Project is a problem for our community. So more of a thank you than a question.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Joseph. Yes. Yeah. There. Yeah. I just want to add, if I may, on the issue raised on the mining. What I forgot to mention is that many of the mining corporations are actually coming from developed countries. They are from Australia, from Canada, from the US. And so that is also, and they're doing mining in these countries and at the same time in developing countries. And that is why we also need to strengthen our solidarity so that we can deal both those living in the countries where these companies are coming from and those that are from the communities affected that are in other countries, because that way we can have a stronger pressure, but also strengthen the solidarity amongst us as Indigenous peoples, regardless of where we are, because we have our common aspiration and our common cause of defending our rights. So that is one area where that collaboration is needed.
Thank you. We have time for about, perfect timing. One just came up in the chat again from Celia Morton, who is from the Indigenous Sami Radio. And her question is, are there any values from your, is it pronounced Kankanaey culture? Is that how you?
Yeah, Kankanaey.
Thank you. Which inform your work?
Oh yes, very much, very much. I mean, I grew up with my parents that carries the values of caring for each other and helping each other in times of crisis. That is very much integral to our culture. And the other one is that don't do harm, instead share what you have. And for me, I grew up with that, and that's also why I see that many of the Kankanaey communities are resilient, because of we still continue that practice of helping each other, and especially now in times of crisis with the impacts of climate change. It's really the support, the mutual support and assistance is making us more resilient to be able to deal with this, because you know that you're not alone, right? That you can count on the support of not only your relatives but the tribe, the people coming together, and that is really, those are the important values of Indigenous peoples that everybody should reflect upon, because the values now, the dominant values now, is individuality, competition, one left for fending for themselves. It's selfishness rather than caring for each other. So I think these are the important values that we need to carry on, and I believe that this is similar to the values of other Indigenous peoples across the world. And that's why we're more resilient. We have our social cohesion is more intact, and that's what we need now.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Celia says, thank you so much, Joan. Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to add, Joan? Do you feel like you were able to cover what you wanted to say?
Yeah, but I also want to express my gratitude to all those who are with me in this journey. My colleagues, my co-activists, Indigenous peoples around the world. I hope we will remain. I mean, our movement. We need to make sure that our movement gets stronger, and I hope this recognition will also further strengthen the attention given to Indigenous peoples' rights, and that I also dedicate this award to the Indigenous peoples that have been standing up for Indigenous peoples' rights, and to those that have given their life for this cause. And it gives me this award gives me hope that they did not die in vain, that there will be a time where we finally will be able to exercise fully our rights and live with dignity and harmony with nature and each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, this recording will be available. We can send it to you if you'd like, if you weren't able to write down all of the different questions and answers. We're happy to send the recording. Otherwise, we'll upload it to our YouTube channels eventually, so it will be there. Thank you so much, Joan, and I'm very excited to see you in Stockholm on December 4th for the award ceremony.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for joining, everybody.